So this is Logic's vintage B3 organ, fantastic emulation of the classic Tonewheel vintage B3 sound with its Leslie speaker. If you don't know what a vintage B3 organ is, or just a Tonewheel organ in general, I suggest you check out different players on YouTube. Just put in Hammond organ Leslie, Hammond organ vintage B3, and you'll find numerous players. We've got a massive variation in terms of sounds, right? And we're going to dive into how you change all of these different sounds. So let's look at the interface. I've got it quite large here, right? And you can change that if you don't know already through the views section, right? Some of the instruments in Logic don't resize well, they get a bit pixelated, but the vintage B3 organ's got an updated UI, it's absolutely brilliant. So we're gonna keep it this size for the moment. What we have is three main panels. We have this top view here, which has our kind of view buttons. This will take us to different windows in a minute. There's a nice little icon of the Leslie speaker's horn behind here, but you can ignore that. That's not functional, it's just there for aesthetics. So that's the top window. We have this main window here, which changes every time you press one of these new view buttons, as you see here. And then underneath this window, we have a few controls, right? Which we'll talk about these. So three kind of areas. This is the main one we're going to be looking at, right, in each section, because it's where all the detail is. So let's start with the main section here, and then we'll go through rotor cabinet, options, effects, and expert in a minute. I'm going to resize this window, and I'm going to bring it down to probably about 125%. I'm going to put it over here, and I'm going to open up our channel EQ so that we can see what's going on with the sounds that we're editing. I want you to think of the vintage B3 just like you would think about any synthesizer, except it's an additive as opposed to a subtractive one. It's not a synthesizer. You may be thinking, what's he on about thinking about it like a synthesizer? It's obviously not a synth sound, but it works very much in the same way. Let me show you. If I play a note, right? By the way, this is the initialized patch, which will be in your course files. Really always important to start from an initialized patch so that you're not confused by all the different sounds that are initially coming through the instrument. So this is the bare bones, nothing going on, and we can go from here. So initialized patch, nothing happens, right? We can see that there's MIDI coming through in Logic. Here, I'm playing F4, and our manual, our upper manual, we'll talk about what that means in a minute, is registering that I'm holding a note, and when I let go, that light goes off. But nothing's happening, right? We can't hear any sound. If I pull down the lowest one of these drawbars, let's see what happens. We suddenly get a tone. I actually can turn that tone down. It's very quiet. We'll get louder in a second. Sorry if you can't hear it. So that's showing us that we have a fundamental tone. And if I play it a bit higher up on my keyboard, you'll hear that it's kind of just a sine wave. Yeah? Very, very boring sound, right? But the way that tonal organs work is that each of these drawbars pulls in an upper harmonic for the note or the fundamental note that you're playing. So here I'm playing F4, and what we get is a low version, the lowest version of that F, right, that the tone wheel can play from the key that I'm pressing. If I bring in this next one here, it's not strictly the next one, but let me just show you. So look at the EQ on the right here as I do this. We see another partial coming up, right? I might do this with a lower note actually. Here we go, so lower note, and then I'll bring in the next one. Now the thing about this instrument, it's a little quiet at the moment. We'll look at why in a minute. We can turn up the essential volume up here, but we'll get into this window in a minute. I'm just going to turn it up for now. There we go, that's a bit better. So we can see that we've got that one fundamental tone and then all the drawbars that we've brought in above it. I'll bring that one in as well, fifth above the first octave. Now, this sounds like a chord to you, right? Because I've just been playing one note, but if I play the instrument like I'd play a melody, really it becomes, you'd think of that if you heard that, you know, from scratch as an actual, like an instrument. Because what we're doing is we're adding the upper harmonics, and that really changes the timbre. We're still hearing that bottom note, the one at the bottom of the EQ here. This is the fundamental note that we're hearing, but all of this other stuff gives it its own timbre. So what you can see this is kind of a mixture between EQ and changing the sound of the instrument. Let's mix between a few of these and see what different sounds we can get. That's one sound. Maybe let's reverse it. Let's have more of the high ones up and less of the low ones. A little bit more kind of square wavy almost, to my ears anyway. But it all sounds a bit boring at the moment, right? Compared to something like this, if we went to... It's kind of a little bit more interesting. Not the greatest playing in the world, but there you go. So it's a little bit more interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to move towards that as we go through in this tutorial. So that's the drawbar settings. I'll do another tutorial on exactly how to get the kind of sound that you're after with the different varieties of settings that we have. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the architecture of the instrument. So what we've been working on is the upper drawbars here. I call them the upper drawbars because we have this upper here. If you saw that organ that Corey Henry was playing, let me just bring that up again, you can see that he's got two keyboards essentially, and we call these manuals in the organ. So the drawbars are here. We have the upper manual and the lower manual, and what you can't see is that below him there, he's playing pedals, right? So there are actually three technically keyboards that an organ player has: upper manual, lower manual, and then the pedals which they play with their feet. And you'll see that this is replicated here by the upper, lower, and then pedals, and these are the drawbars. So this kind of replicates what a standard organ has. But if you, like most of us in our studios, we just have one controller keyboard. We might have another keyboard set up in the room, but we tend not to have two manuals, one on top of each other, and then foot pedals, right? And Logic has thought about this, right? Because it's a very unusual thing to have that. But so you can tackle that in kind of a number of different ways. Let's skip past this section for a second and go down to this area here. So we want to go over to the split menu here, and this will help us understand how we're interacting with these other two sections, the pedals and the lower manual. Because currently, anything I play is, whether it's low or high, is all going to be activated or kind of running through the settings that I have on these drawbars in the upper manual. That's the default setting, and it's the one that I've saved in the initialized patch. So let's go down to split. What we see here is three options for playing the keyboard. We have multi-mode, which would be having three separate MIDI inputs. Basically, if you had a MIDI, either if you set up three keyboards or if you had a MIDI tone wheel organ, which there are many of them. But the kind of, this is the one that we started on, which is basically this keyboard here is our normal keyboard, and it's completely controlling just the upper manual. And then the other option is split, right? So as soon as I move over to here, what we have is three sections. We have this one here, and then this one here. So this is showing us here the upper manual. So this is saying that anything from C#5 or G4 upwards is going to be controlled by these upper manuals. So let's show you that now. So here's G4, right? So this is the transition point. If I go below it, nothing happens. But what you see is that if I play F4, we're suddenly in the lower manual and nothing's happening, right? If I want to play F4 still in my upper manual, I move that down to be F4, and I can still play it in the upper manual. And everything above that is going to be in the upper manuals. Now, everything between F4 and C2 is going to be our lower manuals, but we're not hearing anything, right? Because we haven't changed any of these settings. So let's just put in a few things here, arbitrarily, I'm afraid. Sounds a bit rubbish, but let's stick with it for the moment. That's a bit better. So everything from F4, or rather from E4 downwards, is going to be in this lower manual. And then my keyboard ends, right? So I can't play these pedals unless I octave shift my keyboard down and then I start playing these notes here. But as you hear, there's nothing that's happening, right? So what we want to do is change this a little bit. Now, you might be thinking, why would you do this, right? Well, it's in terms of the variety of sounds between the upper, lower manual, and then the pedals, right? There's no bassist, as I said. It's coming from the bass line. So let's have a little listen to this. So if I pull in these pedals now, let's see what happens. Suddenly, I'm able to play these lower notes here below A2. And you can hear that's a really nice bass sound, right? It's the sort of bass sound that kind of doesn't really... Oh, you see what happened there? I just went above and I went to A2 there, and suddenly we're in the lower manuals, and it gives a bit of a weird sound. So you've got to be careful with where you are. So let's move this up a bit so that in the lower part of my keyboard, I can control kind of a good bass line. And then in my right hand, I'm going to play kind of this upper manual, which doesn't sound so good at the moment, but we'll stick with it. that gives us kind of a bit of variety there. We're allowed to play essentially sort of feels like two instruments really. If you're an organ player, you're going to be used to this and you're going to be bored, but this is just a kind of introduction basically to the concept behind having two manuals, upper, lower, and then pedals. And this is your way of interacting with them. Generally speaking, if you have one keyboard, you can either decide, you know what, I'm just going to use the upper manual. This is what a single will default to. I'm going to split it so that I can have control over three of them. Or if you're weird like me and you have loads of keyboards in your room, you can actually change the keyboard or the manual that you're playing on via different MIDI channels. The other function that is quite useful is the pedal transpose option, not on the multi page, but on the split view. So you have a small controller keyboard like most people on your desk in front of your DAW, and you actually want to be able to play much lower notes than you can without hitting that octave transpose button that we all have on the controller keyboard. You can shift, so you might be playing up, say, let's say here, I'm playing maybe my F3 here. I'm playing in the 3 range, but actually I want to be playing down here, but actually say my keyboard doesn't reach that far, or I don't want to reach that far. What I can do is I can change the pedal transpose. So that means that I'm transposing the pedals section. So I'm transposing all of these notes here down or up 1 octave. So I want to go down in this case, so I do choose -1, and then you can see up here I'm still playing the same notes, but we've gone down an octave. So this is equally useful for the upper transpose. If you want to do a really bright high melody, but you want to be playing a bass line like I am here, really low, you can change the upper manual to go up here. God, I really don't like that sound. As we go deeper into the instrument, you'll see that we can make much nicer sounds than this, but let me just show you what I mean. So here we've got a really low bass line, and then I'm playing a really high melody over the top. Over the top there. And my hands are only kind of, 30 centimeters apart. Very, very useful functionality of this instrument. Okay, cool. So let's go back to single mode, and we will go over to the controls again. And this means that everything that we play on the keyboard is just going to be affected by the upper manual. So I'm going to move all of these back so that we're not confused by anything. And this is typically how you'll be using it, especially just if you're in the middle of a session. You don't want that multifunctionality of the different sections. You just want a different kind of, maybe you want a chord going over the top underneath all the other stuff that you're doing with your other instruments. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of the whole instrument. So now we come to the effects panel at the bottom of the main window. I want you to look at this as really not just effects on their own, but really referencing effects and options which are deeper inside of the instrument on these 2 pages. This is kind of at the front level because it's for ease of access. Here we have on the far left the upper manual button and the lower manual button, and what this is doing is turning on vibrato or chorus for the upper manual or the lower manual. As we know, we're only on the upper manual at the moment. That's the only one we're affecting, so doing this won't change the sound at the moment, so we'll just have this one on. Currently, we have the setting at C0, which means that we are on chorus 0. Essentially, these are different settings. We have chorus 0, chorus 1, chorus 2, and chorus 3. And we also have vibrato 1, 2, and 3. So 3 types of vibrato, 4 types of choruses. And basically, that means modulation. It's kind of we won't go over the exact meaning of chorus and vibrato here, but you hopefully know it, or you've taken another course on it. So here, we can see that there's a tiny bit of modulation going on in the EQ. Maybe you can't hear it, but you can certainly see it if you zoom in a little bit. If I turn this off, there's no modulation. Well, there's a little tiny bit which is just resulting from the harmonics themselves. But here, we have a tiny bit going on. Let's change to vibrato. You can hopefully hear there's a tiny bit of vibrato. You can see a lot more activity in the upper harmonics, actually all of them. Let's turn to chorus 1. Now, the rate of this can be changed deeper inside of the instrument. We're not going to do that now. So the way that you want to do it is when you're setting up your sound is you go deeper into options, effects, expert, rotor cabinet, and then once you've set the parameters, you can come back to here and just tweak and turn them on and off at your own discretion. So that's how that section works. The distortion works very much in the same way. We need to be on an effects panel here and have distortion turned on. And the drive put up. Actually, we'll go over this window in a minute. Let's go back, and then suddenly this is active. We have more drive going on. Percussion works very much in the same way. You have to have the settings set correctly in options here, and then you can access it. But I won't go over these too much because the volume and time settings require that we know a little bit more about what percussion is and how it works on a tone wheel organ. But just let's do this and I'll show you that the difference. I'm going to turn off that vibrato, it's very annoying. So we hear suddenly there's an attack to the start of the note. So if you were playing a passage that was kind of really percussive, like, and you wanted a bit more bite to it, you could turn that on. And you can change the harmonic, which is basically the additional harmonics which are added to the attack part of the instrument's envelope, really just the first sound. So if I have that on third, you'll hear it like this. And then back to second, back to third, right? And these settings, as I say, we won't cover. Now, you might be thinking that these settings and what I'm changing is a little bit tame. Again, what we're doing is progressive here. So as we add each setting, it's kind of changing the sound a little bit, but it really gets accentuated when we start bringing in the rotor cabinet. Everything gets a lot more exaggerated. So just learn these from first principles now, and I promise you when we start adding stuff later, you'll understand it a whole lot better because we built this sequentially. The last thing that we're going to cover in this section is the slow, break, and fast rotation. This is talking about the Leslie speaker, which we can kind of see through this part of the instrument here, through this window. This is kind of half a tone wheel organ and half a Leslie speaker, this interface here. It's kind of showing us that there's a Leslie speaker going on behind. And if I turn this to slow, you'll see that the Leslie speaker's horns start to move around. Now let's see what that actually does to the sound, right? Let's turn it back to break, which means off. There's no movement, apart from the vibrato, so we're going to turn that off. And hopefully if you're wearing headphones, you're going to hear the kind of Doppler effect, which is coming from that Leslie speaker. And then if we turn this to fast, you get that classic vintage B3 sound where you move higher and lower in terms of oscillation on the Leslie speaker. So really, really cool setting there. We'll dive into more of that. The last little thing I want to show you is this presets area. This gives us a number of different presets for the different drawbar settings. So when you first start out playing with this instrument, it's hard to know how to get the sound that you're after, and these come with their own presets. If we have a listen to this one. So let me just go through these now. You can explore these and all the different sounds, and you can kind of use one of these presets and then dial something back, add something in, kind of educate you a little bit about what sounds you're after. So the cool thing about this is that as you change these, essentially this little icon here changes. So you kind of have an indication as to what your preset is as you change it live. You see here I'm adding the top end, and then our top end in the icon changes. So this is really useful. Now, if you mess around with one of these, say we're in an actual preset of the library, a random one here, and we go to this and we go, okay, well, I'm just going to mess around with that. And then you go, hang on, wait, what was that preset again? All you need to do is move to another instrument and then come back. Now, it looks like that stayed the same there, but actually, as soon as I click on it, it updates again. So that's just a little bug in Logic that actually all you need to do is change to another instrument and come back to that preset, and all of your presets within that instrument will be the same. Now, you'll notice this central section here, and this is a way of modulating between these presets. So if you grab your mod wheel and move it, you'll be seeing this happening, right? So it's upper morph, which basically means it's morphing between these. Well, actually, it's morphing between a number of different settings, but not through these presets necessarily, using your keyboard. You can also select via the keyboard keys, or basically like key switches. And once I've turned that on and I play C0 on my piano, you'll see that this button here is lit up. And I can go through the different notes on my keyboard. You You can see there's this bug with actually Logic's thing, so that each time the UI updates. But it's okay, don't worry, you can make sense of this, I'm sure. So we can hear on this one, on the clear setting, there's nothing. But as soon as I change it, I'm holding a chord. I'm key switching through all these different settings. That's really, really useful because, like you saw with Corey Henry playing, he has direct access to the real drawbars, but we don't have that if we're just in our studios. This is kind of a proxy or a kind of way of being able to actually do that yourself. Okay, so that's the main section of the tone wheel organ. In the next video, we're going to dive into the rotor cabinet options.